Moving Wisconsin forward, one joke at a time, this is Kristen Bry with As Goes Wisconsin.
Yada, yada, yada.
Hello, Wisconsin! What, oh what, do young conservative voters want? 844-967-2789. And I am fully aware that we may not be able to answer this. That today, considering I don't know how many young conservatives listen to this show.
That's a good point.
And if they do, they may not be listening right now because they're at work. But it is a question that Republicans themselves are trying to figure out and answer, not only just in Wisconsin, but I think nationwide. And I bring this up today because there was a profile in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel by Tyler Katzenberger, who is Gen Z. He is a intern with Milwaukee Journal Sentinel this year. He was a political intern with Cap Times last year. I got to meet him last year. He's wonderful. But he did a kind of it's a little bit of a profile on Brian Schimming and the chairman of the Wisconsin GOP. And a little bit, he interviews some young Republicans and just kind of points out the discrepancy that is happening with Republicans' attempt to have the same success with young people that Democrats have had, both in the last midterms and in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court race in April. And, you know, I want to try to talk about this topic genuinely, but I don't know. It's funny because I feel like while many people listening right now might consider me young at 37, which I am, I'm also not 21, and I don't know a lot of 21-year-olds.
Which kind of surprises me.
Why does that surprise
Just because you know such a wide range of people. You really do.
I think like of my friends, it bottoms out at like maybe late 20s.
Yeah.
When you're 37 and you try to talk to a 21-year-old, you may feel young, and then you talk to someone who's like that young and you're like, oh man, I'm old.
Yeah, right. Priorities a little bit different.
And so it's interesting. And it's funny because, you know, this is politics, but it's also what advertisers are constantly trying to figure out.
Oh,
too,
it's all
right?
about demographics.
Right. And
sure.
just what does Gen Z want? What do they respond to? And at least with politics, there's some polling that can be done versus the nebulousness. Is that a word?
Nebulous is a word.
Nebulousness as a noun?
We'll look it up.
Nebulous, because nebulous is an adjective.
Yes.
The noun of whatever nebulous is. Of, you know, what do Gen Z respond to? One thing they certainly responded to was the Grimace milkshake thing that an advertising came up. Did you not hear about this?
No.
So it was a trend that was going on social media when Grimace from McDonald's, I think it was his birthday or something. And so McDonald's introduced a purple milkshake. And it started taking over TikTok of doing this like Grimace challenge where basically you'd order a milkshake and then people were coming up with these extravagant, like paranormal ways that they died from drinking the milkshake. And it was just like elaborate videos that people were making. And there was thousands of them. And lo and behold, that wasn't just like an organic thing that started. An advertising company worked with McDonald's and planted that.
Very smart.
And that's like one of the few advertising campaigns because Gen Z is just weird. Like they like weird things. They're super smart. They're super there's like a bunch of existential things that they like. They're very like anti things that are cringe to them. And for some reason that took hold. But in general, advertising has like fallen very flat for that generation. And I think similarly, it's interesting to think about what is the generational gap that's happening more distinctly with Republicans than Democrats when it comes to reaching like 18 to 25-year-olds. And so I would love to hear from you, especially if you have young people in your life. Like, what are the things that they care about? 844-967-2789. And because I read this Journal Sentinel article And while they don't really point to any polling of young people, they kind of just take a couple anecdotes of Republican leaders, like young leaders at Madison or Milwaukee. And like the two they kind of come up with are crime and inflation.
Inflation.
And inflation, because the thing is, money, I mean, being a broke college student, like that makes sense to me to a certain extent of like things are expensive. Crime feels less on the money. And this all kind of like this article and some of the answers that were given kind of just reminded me of like top down, like stretching the argument. Like these are the issues as Republicans we want to focus on. So we're like finding the young people who also agree with that versus actually listening to young people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And because of course you're always going to find someone or a handful of someone's who are like, yeah, that's a big deal. But it reminded me of last August during the gubernatorial primary debate with Rebecca Clayfish and Tim Michaels and Tim, who's the other Tim? Tim Time.
Yeah.
And Rebecca Clayfish stood on that stage, who has 2 young daughters, and was like, I really think young people care about income taxes. I was like, I don't think so. I think they're more excited about following the fun city or the fun job than how much they're paying. Like that's how they're choosing where they're going to live. I think you're just wish casting a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
So I would love to hear from you if you have an idea, if you've talked to young people. What is the gap? What is the gap between younger and older Republican voters? Because there are young conservatives.
Certainly.
Turning Points USA claims that they have like 1,300 chapters across high schools and colleges, and there are young Republicans, and so it's not like oh they just don't. But it's just they're not motivating them to vote. And reading this article is like, I still don't think you get it. Even though you say it's important to you, like it doesn't feel like you're listening. But I could be totally wrong. 844-967-2789.
Jack from Merrimack. Good morning, Jack. What do you want to say?
Good morning. Well, my son just graduated this spring from UW-Eau Claire. And while he tends to be progressive, a bit less than I, more towards his mother's side. But in any case, he had a girlfriend who was from a very, very conservative family up in the farming country around the UW. And one of the things that I heard on occasion was that she was concerned about the cost of education.
Mm-hmm.
She was going to school at Eau Claire too, and it cost $10,000 a year for schooling at a public university. Excuse me, that's like $40,000 or $50,000 that you have to pay before you even can look for a job. Another thing that I know that she was concerned about, being from a farming area, is the environment.
Yeah.
And she does know about global warming, and was quite concerned about that. But Republicans are going to have a heck of a time recruiting significant numbers of young voters if they do things like, for instance, cut funding to education, keep people who are obviously anti-environment on the DNR board, like this guy Prem was for 2 additional years. They're going to have trouble recruiting young people if they throw barriers to voting, like, for instance, not being able to use a student ID or moving voting precincts away from campuses. I mean, this is a problem, and this has been one of their big thrusts. I can't remember who stated it, but one of the upper level Republicans in Wisconsin stated something like, we've got to do something to keep these college students from voting. It's a terrible thing. They can get out of bed on a Tuesday morning, vote, turn around and go back to bed.
That
I
was
think
Cleta.
that was Cleta Mitchell. Yeah.
Yep, Cleta Mitchell. Yeah, we don't want to make it easy for those kids, Jack.
Thanks so much for the call, Jack. And it's interesting
Yeah.
the anecdote that he just gave of his son's girlfriend, because I was in the attempt to try to talk about this in a genuine way this morning and not just like make fun of it. I was trying to Google and find what I could find about this topic. And it's interesting. And in some of the articles, I think there was a couple from NPR, there was a couple from Pew Research that like that he actually hit the nail on the head. It is the economy, because it's struggling. Like more and more Gen Z and millennials are struggling to keep their head above water.
Yep.
So it's affordable housing, both rent and am I ever going to be able to buy a house? It's the fact that there is no accountability to the universities just to continue to get more and more expensive. And it also is the environment. Even young conservatives are seeing the writing on the wall,
Yes.
and that there is not that saying there's a generational gap between, at least what I'm reading. Again, this is I can't speak because that is not my community, but at least what I read this morning is exactly that there is a lot of young conservatives, including people who spoke on panels at CPAC.
Oh, wow.
Talking about the environment, which obviously was very different than what was happening on the main stage.
Oh, sure.
And some of the other stuff there was a Vanity Fair article saying the conservative youth movement is still going strong, except at the polls. And one of the things that they also mentioned in that one is there's a huge generational divide between young and old conservatives in religion and how religious they are. And so the fact that there is such a doubling down on, Christian nationalism, while there are, I think, more than a third of Generation Z, currently in their late teens and early 20s, in America identify as religiously unaffiliated. And some of those are obviously young conservatives. And so we're going to keep this going after the break. But if you have thoughts on what do young conservatives want, especially young conservative voters, we'd love to hear from you. 844-967-2789. We'll be right back. Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. I'm Kristen Bry. She is Jane Madnair, and we are talking about what young conservative voters want and how much Republicans are actually listening to them, considering, at least on their face, they're saying that we know that we need to appeal to young voters. We need to motivate young voters, especially as the last couple cycles have proven that the youth vote for Democrats are certainly turning out. And so I bring this up now because the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel wrote an article about how Brian Schimming, chairman of the Wisconsin GOP, is saying that this is a top priority for him. And yet, at least what was brought out from what that actually looks like in the article, I'm kind of calling BS on, as far as, is this actually you listening, or is this just you finding young people who agree with the things that you're already focused on, which is inflation and crime? But I could be wrong. 844-967-2789. And I'm asking because I know a lot of our listeners are probably not Gen Z conservatives.
True.
But would love to hear from you as far as the young people in your life that you talk to. Are they politically active at all? And if they are, what are the things that they say that they care about? 844-967-2789.
We got a couple of texts, John from the Falls. Hello, ladies. As the father of 2 boys, I can tell you there are 3 things they care about the most: climate change and having a planet that they can actually live on, gun violence after going through public school active shooter drills, their friends being treated equally regardless of race, gender, and sexuality. Republicans are actively working against all of these things, so I'm guessing that's the reason for the large gap.
Well, and it'd be interesting, John from the Falls, do your kids vote? Are they more conservative or are they more progressive? Because I think that's also, I think everything you just listed makes sense as far as what I feel like when I follow like Gen Z for Change and a lot of the different grassroots groups that are focused on young progressives, but also like specifically, I'm interested in like what are the priorities of young conservatives and how does that differ? Because I don't know, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's more overlap than people think there is as far as tolerance for different social issues and not like I did I did in my hunt this morning. I also found a Rolling Stone article that talked about how Gen Z conservatives just wish people would stop saying woke.
Well, that's not going to happen.
And so it was young Republicans are begging party elders to stop saying woke. And they're like, it's so to the young Republicans in attendance, the vernacular feels a bit cringe.
Oh, it's cringy.
We don't really use woke as our term, says Evan Massey, a student at the Community College of Rhode Island. Chris Johnson, the managing director of Young Conservatives for Carbon Dividends, likens its use to how out of touch uncle might search for the word to describe a nephew at the Thanksgiving table. I think a lot of older folks use it as if they, but they don't really know what they're referring to. It's just like a catch-all colloquialism, and it's like, this is not a term that's reaching the youths.
The youths. Yeah, it's not cutting through. Sorry. 844-967-2789, 844-96-PARTY. Dave from Mequon. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call, for starters. Really quickly, in regards with what you're discussing here, I'm sure you're familiar with Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
He's 29 years old. He's a huge ultra-conservative. He actually has a pretty wide following. Candace Owens, a little bit older, she's a black female conservative. And you have James O'Keefe. You have Ben Shapiro, who's Jewish, that has a lot of followers as well. What they're really focusing is on multiple issues. One, to try to take the equation of neutrality on a lot of different subjects. But the biggest thing is that people have choices without the government, interfering on everything. And that seems to be a big consensus. Now, granted, I'm much older than these people, but in talking to like my nephew, who actually is a Michigan State, he is a conservative, which is surprising because I never thought that he would be a conservative.
Because he didn't get indoctrinated yet?
But the bigger thing is that there's been a big push. I guess, they're talking about we have this trade, supply issue right now because we have a lot of people that are kind of downplayed blue collar jobs. It's frowned upon. And so, conservatives have been trying to say, hey, listen, you know what? There are other options other than just getting a 4-year degree in college. So they feel that the people, or at least conservatives, younger conservatives that do not go to college, they're trying to say, well, hey, listen, they want to start up their own business. They want to start up or do something completely different. And I think sometimes there's a gap because we're focusing on one thing. We've heard about with sports, and obviously that's controversial. You have Moms for Liberty.
So I guess I need, because Dave, because we're coming up against the break. So what, if you had to sum it up in like a couple words, what is it that you think young conservatives care about? Like, give me 2 issues.
We got a minute.
I think right now, national debt. They're very worried about that. I think everybody's worried about with the economic end of things. That's number one. And number two, the whole issue with the sporting world right now at this point, that seems to be very talked about, that female sports in particular, they feel are being destroyed.
Interesting. Let us know if you agree with Dave that you think that's what young conservatives care about the most: national debt and women's sports. 844-967-2789. We'll be right back. Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. I'm Kristen Bry. She is Jane Vadner, and we are trying to get thoughts on what do young conservatives voters want, what will motivate them to vote, and what is the gap that's been created between the Republican Party, what the Republican Party thinks older voters want versus younger voters, and if they can actually bridge that in time for the 2024 election. And I claim I can read as much as I can read, but this is certainly not a community I can speak for
Right.
or I know many of. And I was trying to think. I was like, who can I even try to
To talk to?
Benjamin, who he was a fellow at Institute for Reforming Government, Garbian.
Garbedian.
Garbedian.
Yeah.
I texted him. I don't think he has not gotten back to me, but he's like I think he's one of the few young
Conservatives.
because he just graduated from Carroll University.
Right.
But he's one of the only young conservatives that I know that I could be like, let's talk about it. And I'd be interested to see, maybe he'll follow up with me after
That'd be great.
I can follow up with you all on what he tells me, because my instinct of our last caller, Dave from Mequon, saying that their two top issues are the trans bills and trans people playing in women's sports and the national debt being the two top issues, at least from everything that I read this morning in trying to prepare for this topic, neither of those came up.
That's not it.
The culture war stuff came up a little bit in the Rolling Stone article, talking about how they would younger people would hope that they would stop saying woke because the word itself is cringe. But not that they're shying away from culture issues, and that there is in some groups, and we've seen this a little bit with the big survey they did it throughout the UW system of younger conservatives feeling like they get
Dissed,
bullied,
looked down on.
Yeah, for having their opinions on certain social issues and yada yada when they're on college campuses. And so they touched on that, but it's like some of the ideas behind this like colloquialism that woke has become, even though no one can really define it, is certainly there with younger conservatives, but they just don't call it that. And but again, some of the things that came up was they're not as religious. They do care about the environment. They do care about how expensive everything has gotten. How do you like get a leg up in this world? They care about how expensive college is. And so, and a lot of those things, it's like, yeah, a lot of people care about those things.
Right.
So would love to hear from you. What do you think young conservative voters want? What have you heard from young people in your life? 844-967-2789.
Beverly from Richland Center. Good morning, Beverly. What do you think?
I think the Republicans have put themselves in a real hole. I taught college for many years. In the last few years that I taught, I noticed a real significant focus of students on social justice and you just treat people right. It was just pervasive among all of the students. And I talked to a young Gen Zer a couple of years ago because I suspected that a lot of this was coming from the anti-bullying training that they were getting in the elementary and high school. And this young lady said to me, she said, no. She said, that's not it. She said, it's our parents' fault. She said, they sat us down in front of the TV and we watched Mr. Rogers and the Sesame Street and a lot of these other programs that emphasize treating people decently and being nice and whatever. And so these kids have been imprinted with this social justice, be kind, be decent message. Good luck now trying to change that.
Well, and Beverly, it's so interesting because in the article about wokeness at CPAC, there was someone who was on a panel that said, like, as a party, we need nicer rhetoric. But simultaneously, as all those people those like superstars of the conservative movement right now, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, like, I wouldn't describe these people as nice
at all.
And yet they have a fairly young following. So it'd be interesting. Like, I agree with you, but I also wonder how much that is still people who are like, if the young people you were talking to, were they also conservatives?
I came from an area that was very conservative.
Okay.
So
I guess that's true.
Of course, I don't know what the politics were, but this was, central Indiana. It was very red.
Interesting.
So it's hard to say. Plus, you've also with these young kids, they're still forming ideas, and so they're going to be influenced by some of this, rhetoric. But my guess is since they've been imprinted with this decentness from from their childhood, that may eventually come through.
Super interesting.
That's
Thanks for
really
the call,
interesting.
Beverly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beverly.
Uh,
844-967-2789 if you want to call and or text and weigh in on this. What do you think, or what have people in your life, young people in your life, told you that young conservatives want?
yeah, it was interesting. There was actually a really well written op-ed for USA Today by a USA Today intern that was titled "The GOP isn't interested in Gen Z. Republican Party has abandoned young conservatives like me." And he just kind of rails on the fact that it's a lot of the economy stuff of just how like the Reagan he literally writes out the Reagan agenda emptied out America.
Wow.
Globalization offshored millions of jobs, disseminating the well-paying, low education careers that allowed decades of easy access to homeownership and prosperity. My generation grew up surrounded by closed factories, shadows of once vibrant main streets, and, at least in Appalachia, an oppressive opioid crisis. And it's interesting. I mean, he ends on saying how much the importance of family should be like a central role of government, which I don't agree with. But it's interesting how much in reading, it's very well written, of what he has talked about as a young conservative, both fiscally and socially, that I was like, all right, right on, kid. Like, I agree with a lot of that. And so I'm actually really excited because next Wednesday, friend of the show, John Russell, who, speaking of Appalachia, that is where he lives in Ohio. We've had him on a couple different times
He's
talking
terrific.
about the independent reporting he was doing on the Norfolk train derailment. But recently he went to a Trump rally and talked in like a very, and he is like a very proud mullet wearing leftist that like also is a bartender at like a Rust Belt working class bar. And so he's very accustomed to having these conversations. But it's interesting when you watch the video of the working class issues that come through, that it's like, no, we care about that too.
The economic issues.
The economic issues that it's like, no, both people on the left and the right, like as far as when it comes to like class stuff, are saying the same things. And so yeah, so it's super interesting.
844-967-2789. From the 608, does Dave from Mech One realize that all the young conservatives he's describing are reading scripts written by the Koch brothers and other people? Well, and I as far as Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, they're not young. I mean,
29 is still pretty young.
ish, but they're not 18 to 22 or 23 or 24. Ben Shapiro's got to be in his mid 30s.
Yeah, he might even be 40.
Right?
And yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that I think is interesting is like, what is, like, we've joked about this before. I think we were talking about it last week with the fact that Scott Walker is the president of YAF instead of someone who is
Young.
Like, even like, I mean, he's, I don't think he's quite a boomer. Is he Gen X probably?
Probably.
Um,
What about one of his kids?
yeah. Who
Wouldn't that
were
make
both
more-
into politics.
Right. Wouldn't that make more sense?
And so it's like, what? So it's like sometimes this like top down, and I get that you're like, oh, you want people who have like experience to run these big organizations. Cause I think that's like, it's like a $40 million like operation.
Pays a pretty good salary too, I understand.
It does. But it's like versus the article you found this morning, Jane, about David Hogg, who was one of the
Heartland
survivors.
survivors.
The survivors. And he has started a new, it's not a PAC. It's kind of like Run for Something.
Right.
A new organization that's going to help people under 35 run for federal seats and people under 30 run for statewide seats, specifically in unchallenged open Democrat seats. And so in the same way when we've talked to She Should Run, Aaron Los Cuatraro, in an organization that recruits women who have never run before to run for something that I think specifically works with candidates who are progressive. This is a new organization that is specific on not only just trying to get people to vote, but also getting young people to run for something. And so it'd be interesting to see how much of there is a difference, and I don't know how you measure this, when it comes to the activation of young people that is bottom up versus top down. And some of these Turning Points USA, some of these bigger organizations that are pretty top down. Like, I mean, they have local chapters, but as far as an organization, like it's an organization versus like Gen Z for Change is basically just a bunch of kids who like found each other online and started organizing.
Yes.
And how motivating and empowering that is to be running your own show versus being told this is what we're doing. So
844-967-2789, 844-96-PARTY if you want to check in. I just find it very indicative of how the Republicans kind of treat all of their constituents. It's
but
like,
we know best.
well, yes, we know better than you, and we're going to stick our fingers in our ears and pretend we don't hear that you want legalized medical marijuana, that we don't want permitless concealed carry, all of those things. They just don't want to hear those things. And so they're just going to say, yes, our young conservatives are really worried about inflation.
They're really worried about men playing with
And yes, that's the top thing. We're talking about a generation of kids who, and John from the Falls, I think, mentioned the active shooter drills.
Yeah.
I find it remarkable that one side is so concerned about drag queens traumatizing children and not assuming that decades of active shooter drills in your schools has not traumatized our children.
I know.
I don't understand that.
Or then that was why you played the Shakespeare song before, but that, in the ongoing attempt to
ban everything,
reinvent education in Florida schools are now censoring Shakespeare to avoid sexual content. Because again,
for pity's sake,
so traumatizing.
Yes.
That Shakespeare.
Well, I saw the movie Romeo and Juliet. Man, I've never gotten over it.
But yes, under the neglectful eye of Ron DeSantis, Florida's educational offerings have been looking increasingly bleak since the state adopted the Parental Rights in Education Act, also known as the Don't Say Gay law, which some people I know that listening would not like that we called it that. But now, along with the vilification of classroom lessons about queerness and gender identity, Florida school districts are turning their focus to anything housing sexual content, including AP psychology courses, and it appears the works of William Shakespeare. This is also the same state that banned being able to show the statue of David, correct?
Oh, yeah. Right.
According to the Tampa Bay Times, some Florida schools are planning only to use excerpts from Shakespeare's works rather than the full text of his plays to avoid content that's too sexual a foul for the law. There's some raunchiness in Shakespeare because that's what sold tickets during his time. During his time, doesn't that still sell tickets?
Oh, give me a break.
But it's interesting because it's poetry, so you have to have a certain, like, Shakespeare's not explicit, right? Like, a lot of Shakespeare is reading in between the lines, and there is ton of innuendos.
Without
don't get
a
me
doubt,
wrong,
for sure.
but like, you gotta get what the innuendo is. It's not just like
it's not in your
and
face.
then she effed, and then this P went in this V.
And
all right. Well, when we come back, 3 headlines and a lie. We missed it last week, so we'll see how Jane can do. You can play along at home. This is As Goes Wisconsin. We'll be right back.
If music.
Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. I'm Kristen Bry. She is Jane Matnair. And we are back to playing our fun weekly game of 3 headlines and a lie, where we go through 4 headlines. 3 of them are real, and Jane has to pick out which one is not real.
I am not feeling confident today. No.
Well, what makes you feel more confident versus other weeks?
Because some weeks I just feel like I've covered a lot more material, off the air and read a lot more things. And this has not been one of those weeks.
Not been one of those weeks?
No.
So you're not feeling confident when Luke Mathers is here tomorrow for our civic media crossover and you get to play a headline game again?
We'll see how I did not do well last week.
We didn't have it last week. So who did against Maggie?
Maggie.
2 weeks ago?
Yeah. Whatever.
I think we went off the rails a little bit during that episode. All right. Let's kick it off with number 1, our first headline. Italian man crushed to death by falling wheels of cheese.
Oh.
This could happen in Wisconsin.
What was it? Mozzarella?
I don't know.
Probably
It
not.
may
That's
not be
the-
real.
They don't make mozzarella in wheels, I don't
But
think.
yes, Italian man crushed to death by falling wheels of cheese.
That's tragic.
Number 2. A dog hit the pedal of on a golf court. No, a dog hit the pedal on a golf cart and ran over a 4-year-old who was uninjured.
I think that's true.
Okay.
We'll see what my other choices are.
Number 3. Driver injured after car crash into second floor Pennsylvania home.
I saw the picture.
Okay, so you know that one's real.
Yep.
So you've narrowed your choices. Meteorologists say fog can anger migrating birds and cause mid-flight fights.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Let's go through. The meteorologists say fog can anger migrating birds and cause mid-flight fights.
All right.
All right, so all 4 again. Number 1, Italian man crushed to death by falling wheels of cheese. Number 2, a dog hit the pedal on a golf cart and ran over a 4-year-old who was uninjured. Number 3, driver injured after car crashed into second floor of Pennsylvania home. And number 4, meteorologists say fog can anger migrating birds and cause mid-flight fights.
Okay, that is the lie. No, I'm sorry. 3 headlines. Yeah, that is the lie.
That is the lie.
The fog and the birds and bird fights.
That is the lie.
It is?
Mhm.
All right.
Good job.
Thank you.
So yes, indeed, a Italian man was crushed to death by falling wheels of cheese.
That's terrible.
Giacomo Ciparini, sure, 74, died Sunday evening in his warehouse near Bergamo.
Oh.
The owner of a cheese factory in northern Italy has died after he was crushed when thousands of his cheese wheels fell on him. Woof.
I guess he died doing what he loved.
Yeah, a Parmesan hard-style cheese that is popular in Italy was in his warehouse near Bergamo. I don't know if I'm saying that right. On Sunday evening, tending to 15,000 cheese wheels that were aging. All of a sudden, a 30-foot high shelf holding the wheels, which weigh about 20 kilograms or about 44 pounds, gave way. That created a domino effect and sent the massive wheels flying and ultimately burying their maker.
That's terrible.
That's terrible. This is what don't work alone, people. I don't know if it would have made a difference if someone had been there. All right. Yes, indeed. A dog hit the pedal on a golf cart, ran over a 4-year-old who was uninjured.
That's amazing.
A fire crew's dog jumped on the pedal of a golf cart, which then struck a 4-year-old Michigan girl, leaving her with no visible injuries. I don't know why there was a random golf cart or why the
dog jumped in there.
Why the firefighters were there, but Bella, an arson dog, jumped down from the seat of a golf cart and landed on the accelerator pedal, sending the cart towards people attending a Friday night festival. So yeah,
at least it had
crisis averted.
Yes, that's good. That's good.
And then I also saw the picture for this one, and
this is crazy.
Whoa,
this was intentional.
So driver injured after car crashed into second floor of Pennsylvania home. So a driver was taken to the hospital after their car flew into a second floor. So imagine that. It's
like a 2-story house.
And into the second floor in the Decatur Township on Sunday. And so upon arrival, the vehicle was found to have crashed into the second floor of the home, and the driver had been removed from the car. The driver was transported to Geisinger Lewistown Hospital. The driver was traveling at a rate of speed and veered off the road into a field. There was a change in elevation between the field and the house. Because of this and the high rate of speed, the vehicle became airborne before hitting the house. So it was intentional in that he veered off and was driving through the field, but it wasn't intentional that he tried to hit the house.
Oh, I see. And I thought it was like an ex-husband or something deciding to launch himself into his ex-wife's house.
No, I think it was going into the house was still an accident.
Oh, well.
I don't think that was like, this is how I'm going to get back at that bee. Like, I may just end myself, but at least I'll wreck her house.
You never know. There's lots of crazy out there.
But yes, indeed. And then, no, apparently fog cannot anger migrating birds.
Well, I'm good. There's one good thing we don't have to worry about.
That is good. All right. Well, fun hour.
Yes.
you-
She's here.
She's here. She's here in person.
I didn't know we got to have her here.
Yes, we are now after a 2-week hiatus. She was traveling, then I was traveling. And so Dr. Kristen Lyerly is not only back on the show, she's in the studio
I'm
today.
excited.
And so we will be back at the top of the hour, after the top of the hour news, with public cervix announcement. And kicking off with just in time, in my 7-week countdown, the FDA has approved the first treatment for postpartum depression.
That's great.
So we're going to talk about that. There's new headlines this week about Wegovy. I feel like every week there's a pros and cons list that comes out about Wegovy and Ozempic, and it may be great for you. It may be cause suicidal thoughts.
But you'll look great.
But you'll look great. You also apparently might do more to actually save your life, in that it may stave off strokes and heart attacks, and so still up in the air. But and then at 11:30, Chris Strasner is here to talk about the Great Taste of the Midwest, one of the greatest beer festivals, he says, in the country. So stick around for the second hour. This is As Goes Wisconsin.